What's your? This is a school. That's about it. Here. This is
Everybody's here. Except Max. Those slackers who don't show up.
Really? I mean, seriously. One more minute.
There's like a glare. Yeah, we can't see the time right now.
Yeah, that one.
Probably satellite.
What is it called? Oh, there's one. Oh.
Extreme precision.
Okay.
Not a donor, not.
That's right. I remember.
Yeah.
Never.
Oh, okay, so that's for the people out there, you know, in the audience.
The time.
It also has a timer on it so that we can keep track of the 3-minute thing for public discussion.
It's exciting, yes.
That is exciting. That's much fancier than a cell phone with a timer on
That's what we were using.
it.
All right, it's 5:30 per the satellite clock. All right, I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is the Harbor Springs, City of Harbor Springs Planning Commission. Today is Thursday, March 2nd, 2023. This is a special meeting of the Planning Commission. Jeff, would you take roll for us?
Yep, Rick Tarczynski,
Here.
Vanessa Warren,
Here.
Emily Dubay,
Here.
Bob Feldman,
Here.
George Pete,
Here.
Bill Mulder,
Here.
Mark Bidet,
Here.
Barry Leskard,
Here.
Nancy Rondell.
Here.
We have a quorum. Everyone's here.
Sure do. That's great. All right, thanks, everybody. And next thing on the agenda is approval of minutes. And as this is a special meeting, we don't have any minutes to approve. We will have a couple sets for the next meeting. And then next thing on the agenda is public comment or correspondence. And this is the section where people can comment or let us know what's on their mind for issues that are not on tonight's agenda. And do we have any correspondence, Jeff, that we haven't seen? Okay, nope. All right, great. Would anyone on Zoom, looks like Kathy Machel is on Zoom or in the audience, care to tell us what's on your mind, what we should think about, know about? Sure. Great. Well, thanks for coming out tonight for the audience. Really appreciate it. All right, we have two things on the agenda tonight. First is our zoning code review, and then second is review of a draft presentation that we'll make to City Council status on the work that we're doing on the zoning code review. And so at our last special meeting, we decided we're going to go into heavy learning mode on some of the principles that were laid out in the zoning reform toolkit and other things that John Michaelangeli has told us about. And speaking of John, he's not here tonight, but we have Sarah Kopriva, who's representing Beckett and Rader. Thank you, Sarah. Very nice to meet you. She came up in the Traverse City office today to tell us about what we're going to learn about. And the topic we're going to learn about tonight is combining zoning codes. So this is a concept. And this is the first we've seen of this. We have Beckett and Rader that they would analyze our existing zoning code and give us a recommendation about whether or how a number of zoning districts could be consolidated. And they put together a very nice report. And Sarah, would you like to lead us through that, or
Sure. Yeah.
anything else we should do first?
Nope, I'll just, do a brief little update and then you can start discussion on it. So we took a look at your zoning ordinance and tried to find some ways to collapse your districts that were similar either in size or setbacks or uses, to try to combine some down. Went from 17 down to 12. After talking about a little bit more with John at the beginning of the week, we were we were even looking at maybe there were a couple more opportunities we can talk about tonight as well, just depending on the feeling of the planning commission. For what you'd like to see. So you can see there's a nice table here that kind of helps show the current districts versus where you're going and what the differences are between them. So looking at combining your R1A, R2 into one district, your R1B and R1C into just one district as well. And then some of your commercial and waterfront districts, combining those together because they're similar. One of the comments, I think Jeff, you had made this comment when we sent over the memo about it, was the waterfront district maybe being an issue, combining the residential use in with the commercial use in the waterfront district, or making it the single family a special use. We could always pull the residential area that's currently on your map. Part of the waterfront, we could pull that into a residential district. So that could always be an option to keep the commercial for the waterfront and then just call the residential. Pick one of the other districts, I guess, to put it into, if that's a concern. If you don't want to go the special use route, can be. I don't know, single family dwellings seem so kind of cut and dry at times to make them a special use to come in front of the planning commission. I don't know if you want to spend your time reviewing that type of an application. So that would be up to you for that component. So I'll just briefly go over a little bit in the tables here. So this is actually an example for the agricultural or the A district, agricultural district, of what it would look like laid out differently than what's in your current ordinance. A little bit clearer to be able to see what each of the items are. All of these are the same or similar to what's in the district right now. When you get down onto the next page, the residential districts, this is where you start to see the consolidation of districts. So they are similar or the same, except for when we're combining the let me look here just really quick. It is the new R1C, so the B and C together. That one has different lot sizes and widths, and so we just took the smallest of the two districts there to combine them together. So currently in your B district, it's 8,000 square feet minimum lot size, and the minimum width is 80. And C has the 6,565 feet. So you'll see that we just pulled the smallest size, because that way you're not creating non-conforming lots for people that are currently C. You don't want to go up to the B to make larger lot sizes and larger widths, because you could potentially create a lot of non-conforming lots that you wouldn't want to deal with for that. And just kind of looking through, like I said, they're all similar. We also feel that you may be able to collapse some of these residential districts down even further if you like. Unless there's an area of town that you're really feeling needs to have a distinct characteristic. When you're looking at this, for example, I'm going to say the new B and C, looking at those, they're similar in lot sizes, lot coverage, front setbacks. Your rear setbacks are similar, that there is potential there that you could combine those districts together as well.
Combine which ones?
It would be B and C. So the new B and C. So the two middle columns there.
R1.
Okay,
Yeah.
R1B and R1C could be just like R1B.
Right. Because see how they're similar. The lot widths, that's probably your biggest difference between 100 and 65.
Yeah,
But when you're looking at lot size, you have 10,000 square feet versus 6,500. I mean, if they're similar enough, lot coverage is similar. So I think there's an opportunity to combine those together as well, to get down to two residential districts potentially. The biggest difference between your current R2 district and your other R1 districts is that the R2 allows for 2-family dwellings, so a duplex. So as proposed, if we start combining those, would be to allow potentially duplexes in whole for those districts. And I don't know if you've discussed that at all with John, expanding the, to allow duplexes in the.
That's one of the
We'll see.
topics we want to learn about.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I think that's a great opportunity to be able to increase density and housing opportunities in the city, is to allow for duplexes throughout. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the housing would look different. I mean, you could have a house that gets split up top floor and bottom floor. You still have one entrance. It still looks and functions a lot like a single family dwelling, but it has a duplex. You already allow guest quarters in a lot of areas. So that's allowing essentially 2 dwellings on a property. So the duplex is similar to that. Not to say that you wouldn't have somebody potentially build or modify so it would look like a duplex, but you could also, and this is another item that I know John talked about, was kind of the characteristics, design characters, and that would help protect the neighborhood as well. You know, so when you're looking at a duplex, you can put in some design characteristics so that it does look like a single family home and the parking functions like a single family home, even though there are 2 dwellings there. Does anybody have any comments kind of over what I've already talked about? Or any feelings? Does anything really scare you about what I'm talking about?
But I'm not really scared by it, but I'm curious. Have you taken the information, you know, the way you consolidate like the residential and see what that looks like on the actual zoning map? And where there may be conflicts, where things just don't really work out as far as, you know, that one lot or one zoning district should be have a certain width, but there's a lot of other ones that are within the reasonable area that would be non-conforming. Have you
Yeah.
kind of taken that next step to really see what that looks like? You know, the zoning map and the adjacencies and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I don't think that you'd have issues with that as it's currently proposed, laid out in here, since it is already the smallest either lot size or width or what exists currently. So we're not creating or changing to make a lot size that right now is allowed to be 100 feet wide is still allowed to be 100 foot wide.
So the non-conforming lot remains non-conforming.
Correct. Potentially you could, and I don't have the details on this, if you do have some lots that, and I don't know if you're familiar with this, if there are a fair amount of lots that, you know, in the current like R1A that has a 100-foot minimum, if there's a fair amount of those properties that are less than 100, or is that pretty standard where they'd be 100?
I'm sure we probably have a number of those situations in each of the districts, just because so many properties within Harbor Springs were developed and the lot sizes created before we had these minimum lot sizes. And in going the direction that we're proposing to go, I think we're reducing the minimum lot sizes, which would bring probably some properties that previous were existing non-conformities, bringing them in line.
Yeah, so helping out with that. And I don't know, I'd have to look at it, or John may know off the top of his head, if there are, you know, to try to get to that, if he's looked at any lot sizes where he would say maybe change a district line or an area to bring it in to allow a smaller lot size. I mean, in looking at the requirements, I would almost push all of the lots, everything to be what's listed here as R1C on the top. If you did that, if you had, you know, your R1E, leave that alone, the new R1A, that can stay the same. But maybe those 2 other columns, if you just migrated everything to be the R1C regulations, you'd bring more of those properties into the fold, have less nonconformities.
Because we'd go with the 65, we'd go with the
Yeah.
6,500.
Yep.
And I'm also probably assuming there are probably some non-conforming duplexes as well in these single family areas, maybe, or they're acting as duplexes
We have a couple.
that would.
Yeah.
Conformity.
One thing that I would like to maybe point out as a slight alternate to this, or maybe a difference. Victor, if you can bring up the zoning code map, one thing that I think we should look at are the locations of where the existing zoning districts are in relationship to each other. And I primarily want to bring this up regarding R1A and R1E as we have them set now. I guess my one thing that I might suggest would be that we combine R1A and E together as opposed to putting R1A in with R2 because of the locations of where they are. R1A is primarily just this district here, and you can see it's primarily the stuff that's along the waterfront and over here on Beach Drive, where R2 is more inland stuff, here, and here.
Jeff,
And then
where's
what's
E?
left there. R1E is primarily just this over here, and that, I think we created that district of R1E because that's kind of an annex into the city. We have a 425 agreement with West Traverse Township. And I think when we brought in those parcels, we created its own district for them. Again, this is long before my time, but based on that's the only area where we have R1E are those parcels in the 425 agreement. I'm thinking that's where it stems from. So that would be maybe my one suggestion if we were to do something different than what they're proposing, would be to combine R1E and R1A as one district, which is primarily the waterfront parcels, and combine R2, R1B, and R1C as the second district. I think-
The lot size though, because in R1A, you've got lots that are much smaller. If I'm looking at this correctly, they don't look like, most of them are certainly aren't 150.
Well, yeah, I mean, they vary in size. I mean, we've got some that are only maybe like 45 to 50 feet. And then we have others that are almost 300 feet. So there's a wide variety. But I think that if we took and looked at R1E and R1A and what the minimum sizes are for those, and we went with the smaller of the two, which would be the least restrictive, that, similar to how we've done when we looked at combining R1B and R1C.
We'll have to double check to make sure there's nothing in that 425 agreement that affects zoning. Because we wouldn't want to. I don't know if there is, so that's something we have to look into before we consider combining them.
Yeah, if we looked at doing that, I don't think we would be creating, if we looked at the lesser of the two restrictions, I don't think we would be creating any new existing nonconformities.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to do it too, because that R1E is it's such a small number of parcels.
And it's just adjacent to the others.
Yeah, if you can change that zoning on that.
Also, when we look at the uses between the different districts, those two are very similar in their uses, wherein most of the other R1, B, C, and R2 guest quarters are special land use requests. I believe, without looking at the code, I believe that they are not special land use requests in R1A and E. If they go to 2 stories for any accessory building, then it is still a special land use, and we have dealt with some of those. But that's, I think, another way where R1A and E are similar as well.
Is R1E all just in that 425, 428, what's the name of that?
425 agreement?
Is RE all that? That's all it is, right?
Yeah, it's just this one area here. We don't have it anywhere else.
And when
And
does that timeline come up where they get to choose?
It's another couple of decades, maybe. I don't have the exact.
Oh, okay.
It's not soon, but
It's
it's
not soon.
but it's
Okay.
back in the 70s.
Nick would have that answer, I think.
And in terms of R1A, I see Woods Drive and Woods Court in there. And isn't that a condo or does that?
I think Woods
Condo
Drive,
association?
that's this area right here. Those might be site condo units. I think they are unit 1, unit 2. I'd have to double check on that. And again, if we're looking at combining districts, we can also look at potentially moving district lines. If we feel that Woods Drive or some of these other areas back here better fit within whatever new district we create, we could certainly look at moving some of those.
Okay.
Or if there are other areas below the bluff here that we think might better fit in whatever we come up with for this side. We could change them from these districts to that district. You know, as you guys look and see what's appropriate.
As we're speaking about lot widths and lot sizes and all that, one of the things that we're going to learn about, one of the recommendations in the zoning reform toolkit is to eliminate minimum lot sizes and eliminate minimum lot widths and all that. And I don't know yet all the implications of that, you know, it seems drastic, but you know, I guess we'll learn what the rationale for a recommendation like that would be.
Sarah, this is good. Keep simplifying.
Okay,
It was one of the principles.
Let's go stop now.
That's good.
Bill, with that, are we opening up a can of worms as far as what infrastructure wise of what the city can handle by putting
By
more?
making smaller lot sizes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. I've been thinking about that too. And I guess conceivably, if we have smaller lot widths and smaller lot sizes, somebody could split a lot, right? And then that would be an extra sewer tap and an extra, you know, water hookup and an extra electric hookup. But some of the other things we're looking at are accessory dwelling units that might have the same effect. Or allowing more multifamily, and I guess that could have the same effect.
Depends partly on if it's important to us to have housing for all across all income levels. Because in order to make it accessible, affordable, whatever term we're gonna use, there's gonna be trade-offs. We're gonna have to decide which is more important, I think. You know, if that's a really high priority, then we have to look at doing some of this. If it's not, then we don't. And there will be spinoffs. I mean, there will be more solar taps and more water tap. I mean, that's a given if you open it up to more folks. So.
On the capacity end, the only real concern we've had on capacity end has been with the sewers. Okay, the electric, there's always room to have increased capacity as well as with the water, but I don't say always, but there is, but right, the main concern is the sewer.
Right. And you'll see in the draft presentation that we're going to go through shortly, that our average household size has been decreasing like crazy. So in the old days, you used to have more people in a particular household, you know, generating sewage and using water and that kind of thing. And now with our aging population and our shrinking household size, that, you know, maybe the capacity isn't that big.
And another caveat there too, is that we consider about the dynamics of Harbor Springs as, you know, 2/3 of the homes right now are, you know, seasonal. If the goal is to increase a little bit more, you know, year-round people in the city limits, that also has an effect on infrastructure because they'll be using that sewer and the water and electricity year-round as opposed to just seasonal. So that's just also
Great
something
point.
to consider as well. I don't think it's an impediment, but it's just something to consider, to keep in mind. That will increase the burden on infrastructure.
Well, what do you believe the carrying capacity of the city is?
Regards to,
Like how many people do you think can live here and use the services that we provide without, you know, breaking the system, so to speak?
Before we start overwhelming like the.
the sewer is almost overwhelming. But the thing with the sewer authority, it's multiple municipalities are involved in that. And so there's a lot of discussions and sometimes even trading of capacity that goes on between the different municipalities to meet that. We've talked about at the sewer authority about building a second area, I guess, storage area or disposal area. Yeah, that's what I call it. It's a spiel basically. So it depends, you know, if we're going to invest in creating that extra infrastructure, you could probably double it. But if you only use existing infrastructure, I'd say for sewer, we're nearing that limit. You know, I don't know, I don't have an exact number, but it's a concern with every unit that goes in. But with electricity and water, we're pretty open. I mean, we're pretty flexible there. And electricity is also obviously a side conversation, but of course, electrification anyway is a concern of homes and of vehicles. So that's going to add on to our capacity anyway. We're preparing for that as well. But sorry, George, I don't have a precise answer, but sewer is as it exists right now is the one where I'd say we're near the limit.
But wait, there's solutions.
Yes.
There are the things we can do.
I mean, my daughter has friends that live in Cross Village and Petoskey, and I'm running her all over the place because they can't afford to live in the city. We gotta get more homes.
But will those homes be snatched up by
I hear what you're
the
saying.
people we're talking about
I know.
That's, yeah.
before your daughter gets a
May not-
chance, or they'll run the price up so high, your daughter still won't be able to buy it?
Well, one of the other things that we have for future discussion at some point in time is the state passed new legislation providing for 3 or 4 opportunities of ways that the city can participate in helping to ensure that homes are affordable. And we'll discuss in the future, you know.
And you're looking into that?
Yeah, we will bring that up and say, do any of these ways look like things that the city would like to participate in order to help ensure that there are, you know, obviously, we're not gonna, you know, do something citywide, but we could pick locations where we could say, here is an opportunity where something could be done.
I think too, if we look at the zoning map and the amount, percentage that's single family homes as opposed to multiple residential, that's probably one of our, for me, one of our biggest issues. Because multiple residential is a more affordable way for people to live, be it rental, be it sale, whatever, as a general rule. And I think what 91% of a harbor is R1 or single family, not R1, but single family. That's not a particularly healthy balance for a city to have that much single family homes. If we're looking at having different people in town, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work. So, I mean, that's a big question, you know, that's a big thing, changing the zoning. But I do think it's something we have to pay attention to, because otherwise we're gonna spin our wheels a lot if we look at that part of it.
Would any of those opportunities that the state of Michigan is offering be dependent on having specific zoning districts available? Or do you not know yet?
No, it's not related to zoning. It would be some other things that the city could do. Some of them do require that you would set up, let's say, some type of an overlay area, and that you would make opportunities available within that area. So you can control where you do certain things or to what extent you do certain things, but it's not necessarily tied to zoning.
Good questions. Sarah, do we have minimum lot coverage in today's?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, just above that principal building. Oh, in the current ordinance or,
Oh,
yeah,
I didn't.
am I flanking? Like, what
No.
is that for?
So where it says minimum lot coverage, that should not say minimum there. That should say maximum.
yeah.
We have 2 separate lot coverage percentages based on the size of your property.
Mhm.
For properties, for instance, in our existing like R1B, maximum lot coverage is 35% of your lot. However, if your lot is under the minimum size and you're not meeting that max or the minimum lot size, then we allow you to go up to 40% because of the small lot
Okay,
size.
so
I
that,
couldn't
so
figure that out.
That shouldn't say minimum, that should say maximum.
That makes
We
sense.
do have minimum floor area for your dwelling units that you build.
Mhm.
And that's farther down in that principal building section. Right now in R1, I think in most districts it's 1,200. In R1C right now it's 864. But that's specific to the size of the dwelling unit, not the lot size.
so that's another area that we could consider is, do we need minimums at all? And then if we do, is 864 and 1,200 bigger than we might want? We might want to be able to build smaller. homes.
Well, I guess that's a general question. And what's the rationale behind having a minimum floor area?
Yeah.
For a district? What's the goal in having one of those, Sarah? Do you know?
A minimum floor. Well, these are all larger than a single wide mobile home. Is my guess. I mean, it comes from back in the past. The size, usually you'll see a minimum dimensioning which I don't think is in this table. Does your current ordinance have just the dwelling size? It doesn't have a lot of times you'll see, ordinances that'll say a minimum of 20 foot wide for the primary dwelling or 24 foot wide. And so,
With the depth ratio.
yep, for the building or a core living area of 20 by 20, something like that. Those are all intended to limit a single wide mobile home for development. But so you could, I've seen a lot of communities are backing down off of that, the maximum number, but then, you know, do have concerns about, you know, the housing. So you may go with kind of a core area or dimensioning of the building. So you could say 20 by 20, that's 400. Yeah, so that's pretty small.
That's pretty small.
You know, that's smaller than your garage most likely, because a lot of garages are 24 by 24 or 26. But a lot of communities are backing down from having, I mean, 1,200 is quite large for, you know, at least affordable housing.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of houses are smaller, and if they're older homes, you know, you kind of have a mix. You may have some that don't have that, some that are larger than that. You get quite a few larger homes, at least down here. But you may have some that are smaller than that because they're just like a 2-bedroom, 1-bath. The house I live in is a 2-bedroom, 1-bath with a 1-car garage, and it's 700 square feet, you know, with the garage attached. Granted, it's on a full basement, so I have 1,400 square feet together, you know, but it's one person, so how much space do you need?
And the garage doesn't count, or does it?
The garage doesn't count.
The basement doesn't count.
Right, no, it's usually just like kind of the footprint.
Yeah.
You're looking at it, so. I would encourage you to back those down to something smaller. You don't have to go down to 400 or 500, it still could be 700, 800 square feet. To just allow for different sizes. And especially if you're gonna be looking at, or you're comfortable with allowing a duplex in all of your zones, how that plays into it. So I don't know the details right now for the duplex. Does each side of the duplex have to meet that minimum square footage?
That's a good question, and I would have to check the zoning code before I answered that. It's this column here. So, because yeah, it's the minimum dwelling unit size, so it would be 864 per unit
Yeah.
in R2. So in the R2, you'd be at
So you have a building that's.
1,600 plus.
Yeah, to be able to have a duplex.
And that's also the minimum floor area. So I believe we look at the footprint of the home. So
I think the county's down to, is it 560 now or something like that?
It's
for their
pretty
zoning? Or
small.
I think
Yeah.
it's 560 or 580.
Yeah.
And there are also issues in the building code where they do also have minimums. And minimum dimensions and all that kind of stuff that we'd have to consider if we keep a minimum.
Yeah,
I
so
just
that-
wonder if we should have a minimum.
Yeah, so Mark, that's a good, we said, one of our principles was maybe potentially sync up with the
With a building.
county
Yeah.
Yeah.
zoning and or the building code.
Yeah.
And if those things are covered elsewhere, then they don't have it in ours.
I'll get those numbers.
This issue is beginning to show up in northern Ohio, where I'm originally from, with the advent or the arrival of the first tiny houses or the first shipping container houses. And they're having to address this with this minimum thing. And communities are saying it's not worth dying for, you know, to have a minimum amount. You want to put a tiny house, put a tiny house.
Yeah, but economics control it.
Yeah.
Okay, a question that I think we should probably consider or think about, because I don't know the answer to this, but if we do reduce or remove minimum lot coverage or minimum lot areas or minimum lot size, what impact would that have on nuisance? And what impact would that have on fire code? I mean, what we have, those two things we have to think about. Do we have to change our nuisance code, or is it the nuisance code will be fine? Do we, you know, what kind of nuisances will be created or eliminated? Those are just some things to to think about, because as you have more density, then you generally tend to have more nuisance issues. So that's just, maybe it's okay in Harbor Springs, but maybe it's not. So I say that because we have the noise control committee that we talk about these things, at least from a noise perspective. And that's just one issue, but there's others. So it's just something to keep in mind. Even though the nuisance ordinance is part of the city code, it may have an impact on it.
Okay.
I think we can rely on the building code to handle the fire protection issues. Because within the building code, they had all the requirements for different levels of residential adjacencies, distance, separation, and hour ratings for, assemblies and all that. So we can probably rely on the building code to help us with that.
To a certain extent, but the city has talked about with the fire authority about adopting its own fire code as well. Actually having a fire code, whether or not it's part of the city code or part of the authority is something that we're talking about. But it's just something that I think we should keep in mind because the building department, while it does incorporate certain things that could alleviate potential dangers related to fire, there's very specific parts of the fire code that address other things like fire pits and backyards, right? So one complaint we've gotten, for example, before has been like the smoke from the fire pit has been, coming out my yard. Well, now if the lots are a lot closer, it's more likely that more smoke is going to come. And so it's just something to think about there.
And there's impacts.
And that's why you would be
All
considering,
these things.
that's one of the reasons you would be considering a local fire code.
No, it's not one of the reasons, but there's a fire code that the fire authority has been looking at for different municipalities. That's not one of the reasons why, but it's just something to think about is how that would how changing this could interplay with fire code regulations.
When I would encourage you not to try to,
By an individual that wants a job.
if you want to look into what the building code has for the minimum, it is somewhere right around 500. You could just take it out, and rely on whatever they have, or reference that and say whatever the building code says for that. Kind of the same with the fire code, usually it's 10 feet that you have to be between buildings before you have to increase your separation wall. You have different type of construction. So the building code usually allows you to do something. It's just how much it's going to cost you to be able to do that, to have that space. But, if you end up adopting some sort of a different fire code, that could always regulate that kind of spacing too, or at that time you could bring something in to the zoning ordinance to help for that. But it sounds like or I'm not hearing any pushback on trying to decrease the dwelling size to something smaller.
Is there a way that we can kind of enforce what building material, so it's not shipping containers and things like that are getting dropped off on lots to kind of keep the aesthetics of Harbor Springs?
Yeah, it would you'd want to look at the design criteria for that. Do you have any historic districts or anything like that?
No.
Okay. Yeah, so you'd kind of the aesthetic part of it that you'd want to go into the regulation for the design characteristics. So you may not be able to say to somebody, you can't use a shipping container, but you could say you need to cover the shipping container so it looks a certain way. The same thing, when I talked about the single wide mobile home, with the minimum dimensioning and the minimum size, there's nothing that says you couldn't bring in a single wide and put an addition on it or expand it to meet the minimum square foot requirements, because we can't say you can't have this type of construction. But if we put in the aesthetics, or there's a roof pitch that's similar throughout, or spacing or doors and windows, that will help with some of that.
I have one more thing on the residential page here, and that's wanted to raise the issue of the 12% rule in terms of side setbacks. So that's one that is kind of complicated and came into play for me. And I don't know, that's on my list to simplify and to eliminate that, just make a X, just a fixed setback that you have to meet or not meet, and get rid of the 12% floating rule.
I would add that more frequently than not, that is something that causes more problems, and I hear very few people that have concerns. I think the original intent was that when you had larger pieces of property, that the structures would be more centrally located on it, and you would create more distance on the property lines between the homes. But it certainly hasn't I haven't had people saying that they want homes to be farther apart. Maybe that is something that people care about in some areas, but we could maybe address that in another way. Specifically, if we wanted to, like along the lake or something, but I agree with Bill.
All right, any more questions on residential? Or
I have one other thing to talk about, if you don't mind. So, I've had a lot of questions from applicants of types of structures that they can build. And I think that this gets into the minimum size and whatnot a little bit. A lot of people have asked if they could have as their principal building or their home, where they would have garage on the first floor and then living on the second floor. And we specifically have language in our code that prevents that. We say that you have to have a certain percentage of the main floor be living area. And I guess whether we address that now or at the future, if we get into style and design, if that's something that we feel is still important to make sure that we do, or if allowing that style with garage on the first floor, living above be okay for the principal building.
Okay, great.
Why is that a rule? Because the building code would take care of that again.
Oh, automatically.
Yeah, I don't understand
Yeah,
why it's a look thing.
Yeah, well, I see a lot of places out west and stuff where I'm working right now, and where they have, for density, they have parking down below and housing up. And a combination of those things, like one will be set up that way, so you have parking down below. There's some common connector that will take you up to that one. And then next to that would be something that has off-site parking or something like that. So it's a nice mix. And allows for a lot of interesting architecture to happen. You can do that.
Well, the city of Petoskey has those into the hills.
Yeah.
They're living above the garage.
And there could be situations where that lower level that has the garage is considered the basement. And that would be, because we do have some of those in town. This would be situations where the true first floor is nothing but garage with them living above. Typically, we refer to those as, I think, as carriage houses, and we see a lot of people do them as accessory buildings. But we have had people say, that's all I want to build.
Right.
As just the
They
principal
don't need a
building.
lot of space.
We don't need all that extra, but we have a lot of toys. We want to put them in a garage and have the first floor. So I don't know if that's
My favorite one is on Lower Shore Drive, where it runs into 119 on the north end. It's like a 4 or 5 car garage on the bottom, and on top it's a nicely done living area. So the whole structure is done very nicely. He has lots of toys. That makes a lot of sense.
All right, thank you, Jeff. We'll get that on the list for sure. Why don't we pause right here, since residential is probably the biggest, most important area, and see if anybody has any comments or suggestions or questions in the audience.
On the residential
On
side.
the residential only, and we'll come back on the other ones. Where I think you might have some thoughts. Okay,
Are we gonna revisit some of these real specifics down the road if we collapse the things? Are we gonna go back and look at them again?
yeah.
Bill, good,
Yeah.
okay. Okay.
But does it make sense though to have like folks try to get to 3 residential areas? One is along the waterfront that Jeff pointed out, I think is a really good idea. And then have 2 other ones inland, with one allowing multifamily and the other one not. Can it be that simple?
It can be that simple.
Could you phrase that again?
Shoot for 3 residential zoning districts.
Okay.
One being the R1A, which includes the one up to the left and everything.
Okay. so
All
you-
on the water, that's the defining characteristic of it, along with widths and areas and all that stuff. Then have 2 inland residential districts. One that allows only single family housing and the other that allows multifamily housing in some form or shape. Okay. Just
I think that's a
going towards
interesting-
simplicity, and maybe that will help address, the ratio issue that you brought up, that I think is very real.
My only I mean, I think it's a good idea. The only thing is, I think we should look at duplexes in all our ones. I think we need to consider that. But,
Well, maybe we should talk more about what our.
or maybe we need to make more,
If you
multiple
think like,
residential.
I think of our one, like sort of like Main Street, and you have the standard housing along Main Street, the Main Street look. And I think that is nice, but I think there's other areas in town where you could definitely go towards duplexes.
But Main Street has RM, R2, I mean, it's got a lot
It's
of,
all over the place,
it's all over.
depending where you are. on it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But, you
So
know,
I think
but
that's
this-
an interesting,
but-
simpler is better. For me, simpler, just it does away with a lot of the having to ask permission and having, you know, the lot coming to planning and all of that, that really some of it is, we can do it by district, I think. So that's an interesting thought.
So
Well, there's-
two, R1A and R1E go together and R2, R1B and R1C go together. So there's two. When it's all said and done.
But then there's a multiple residential.
Like,
There's,
Yeah.
can I ask a question?
Why can't those be allowed in the when R2, R1B and R1C go together?
we can do whatever we want.
And then we can get
Well,
that.
Next to you.
That's what I think that's what I think we should do. We should have those two. And then the multi-units go in that R2, R1B and R1C.
Simpler is better for me.
Well, can I ask a follow-up question then? What sounds more appealing? If you go to two districts where you have the stuff along the water and then everything else. Doing that way, but then having, let's say, multiplexes, whether it's 2 or 3 or 4, whatever you choose to say is the maximum, as a special land use, where they would come in and there would be the opportunity for neighbors to express their concern with how it might impact their property, or have a third district where multiplexes are allowed by right.
That's sort of what I'm saying.
I need to learn more about what the implications are of putting allowing duplexes everywhere. It's one of the specific recommendations that they make. And AARP makes it and some others. And it's gonna be, there are implications there. I would like to learn a lot more about that before I come down and say one way or another. So that's one of the things that Beckett and Rader were gonna help us learn about. And maybe we can do some individual research too.
So you really want to look before we leave? Pardon me? You really want to look before we leave?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, an accessory ties in, guest and accessory too, of can people live in those?
Right.
And we get rid of the
Accessory dwelling
only
unit.
visitors or whatever, however it's written now.
Got a
And that
number
kind of
of
goes together.
interlocking things to figure out at the same time, like lot widths and all that. And what else can we remove that can be covered in the building code or in county zoning or whatever. So what I'm hearing on residential is that we do, planning commission does have an appetite to simplify and to do it pretty radically. We just don't know exactly how to draw the lines yet and what that would, exactly how we would divide it up. So we'd like to learn more about that. And it sounds like we're pursuing simplification pretty aggressively. Let's make this as simple as possible.
Can we, I think simple is good. I don't know if I care for the word radical. Like, I feel like it's
Did I say
just
right?
simple. You did that.
Oh, okay.
I thought something
Good, thank
radically, it sounds,
Yeah, no,
like, but I think it's okay to ask questions and for people in different areas to inquire, and have to come in and get approval for certain things, but I do feel like, yes, I think that things need to be simplified, but
okay.
we can
Not
still
radical.
ask. I don't think radically.
Thank you for pointing that out. Appreciate it.
Can we talk
Sweaty.
about mixed zoning too, because we've talked about that off and on,
Yes.
but how would that tie in with the residential? Because mixed zoning usually has some residential involved in it, so just to put another thing out there.
Is that?
I think one of the
ROS
future. We have mixed zoning in our ROS district. That would probably be the best example. And actually TR, I think, a little bit has some mix of uses. And we get into that in the next section, it looks like.
But I think, Nancy, what you're talking about more specifically about where it's at and whether it should be expanded or not. And I think that brings up the point of, I think when we look at these in the future, it might be helpful for us as staff or even like a rater, but to have the visualization of what
Agreed.
these lots coming together and have multiple, ways we can play with that. So we can actually see what we're talking about as opposed to using the existing map to try to visualize.
Yes.
And I think that that's gonna fall in line with one of the other topics that Beckett and Rader is gonna bring in is the idea of character districts. And I think that's gonna come into play when we have that discussion at a
Yeah.
future meeting.
Yeah, and I think that'll help kind of, you know, flesh out all of your setback requirements and your uses and things like that when you have that conversation. But knowing that you're interested in consolidating, streamlining, or simplifying, you know, the districts is helpful, because then when we come into that characters items, you're going, okay, now let's nail out some of these details. I almost said minor details. They're not minor, they're all big, they have big impacts, but I think some of that will get easier, and some of like the mixed use districts for you. If you have character districts and what it looks like, the uses necessarily aren't as important, because you know what the buildings and the structures, kind of how they feel and what they're gonna look like. That you might be willing to allow a use that you currently don't allow, because it's something that you don't like the look of right now.
Well, that's okay. Yeah, Rick, go.
How much of what we're doing right now would be influenced by the relocation of 119 as far as districts? Because if that gets moved, wouldn't that tend to move that whole section more out of residential and more into mixed use and commercial rather than residential?
One of the answers, we don't know. I mean, if this is something this council and that wants to pursue and MDOT wants to pursue further, we'd have to look actually to do, MDOT would be looking to do studies, see how the impact of traffic would change on Lake Street versus Main Street, to see if it actually would have an impact where most people still use their same route. So that's something that if the council wants to, engage with MDOT further on, that's something that I talked to MDOT afterwards, that they said they would need to study and do a lot more studies for that. So it's possible, yes, but do we know? No. So we're not sure.
A follow-up to that is, through the master plan and our zoning, we have the ability to shape the community, how the community would like it to be. If people in the community would like to see Lake Street be more of, an expansion of commercial uses, then we can certainly, help shape that so that that's permitted. If the community would not like to see the expansion of commercial uses along Lake Street, then we can make sure that we create regulations through our zoning that don't permit expansion. So that's something that we have the ability to help shape through the master plan and its view of 20 years out, and what we then choose to implement from the master plan into the zoning code.
That's true, but I see Rick's concern
Yeah.
here is that even if we say we want Lake Street to be a residential district, if there is a traffic increase there, who might want to have be in a residential district that's constantly full of traffic, just might make more sense to make it commercial if that's gonna happen. So, but we don't know if that is gonna happen, and that's the point. I think.
Who is the driver? Is that MDOT?
It was MDOT's idea.
Okay. And is that because they're tired of being responsible?
For the washout, and actually, in 2003, well, off topic, and we'll have planning commission will discuss M119 further, but yes, it's MDOT brought it up because of the slope and the stability there, and they don't want to be liable for it.
Okay. All right, so let's, if it's all right, switch over to the next couple of pages. And I can take a buzz through those and see what we think and what we need to learn. All right, Sarah, what do we need to know about community and commercial districts?
Sure, so this does have a little bit of combining of the ROS and the TR districts, and as mentioned on the first page, the TR district is a little bit more restrictive as far as dimensioning and certain items. So we actually, this one went the other way with the ROS, so these requirements are similar to the ROS, so that will change what you have for the TR district, which you don't have a lot of property that is currently zoned TR. There's some by the waterfront, that's TR. And then there is some up off of Lake Street, kind of in the B2 district. There's one, it looks like one parcel there maybe. That's the only areas that I found for that, and then you just have the one ROS section up on Lake Street there. And so it may be worth, I haven't looked at your future land use map, so I don't know if there's opportunity to expand that based on, you know, whatever you'd like to do, but that could be a discussion at some time as well. If those districts kind of align with your current future land use map. If there's opportunity to expand if you'd like to, or if you want to leave it, you know, as it currently exists. So that looks like the, you'll know there. Office service, so that matches currently.
But the TR is
The
gone.
TR is just commercial.
Yeah.
Yeah, some is commercial, some is multi-residential.
Okay. So those are already kind of transitioning, you know, towards that commercial, out of the residential, but could be mixed use more so, for each of those districts. But you'll see here kind of how, you were discussing in the residential districts, no minimum lot sizes, minimum lot area, except for that ROS district. Kind of mixed use that you have there versus your commercial districts just don't have the minimums at all. I don't know if you've seen any kind of a negative impact from having that in your commercial districts, if you've had a bunch of splits or anything like that for commercial because you don't have a minimum lot size. You know, I have worked in communities where they don't have a minimum lot size for the residential. But it's was a more rural community, so it just led to a lot of land divisions, where here I'm not sure that you'd have that same implication for it.
There's a practical point where it doesn't make sense. for
Right.
businesses or
Yeah.
residentials to
Yeah.
divide smaller.
To cover everything. In here, though, you'll see kind of going back to the simplification, where there's two different sets of setbacks related to either commercial or residential in the ROS district specifically. And I'm wondering if there's any kind of an appetite to standardize that, just pick one number for both of them, or if there's a reason you'd want to keep larger for the residential, which is kind of interesting because typically your residential uses have less impact on your neighbor than the commercial uses would have.
So why is it?
I'm guessing it's to protect the residential properties, so there's more space. 5 feet's probably not gonna make a huge difference between commercial, but you're almost placing the burden on the residential property owner instead of the commercial, where you would have commercial, maybe there needs to be some sort of buffering or fencing or wall or something to protect the residential neighbor, instead of placing the burden on a little bit more space for setbacks on the residential property.
Any thoughts about going to one number for all uses?
For the side yard setback, things like that.
Yeah, for
I
the
think-
principal,
I think the idea there was that commercial buildings can tend to be larger. And so if you place a large building on a lot, having a larger setback doesn't make it feel like it's taking up so much of the lot, or makes it feel like it's not overly congesting the property. That's my kind of guess as to why we have
The
some.
bigger setbacks are on the residents.
Or,
Yeah.
I think they should.
but I'm wondering, did we type that in wrong? Let me double check what's in your current ordinance, because maybe. Well, actually, it's probably the combination of the two districts. When John was
Yeah.
writing it, he was trying to make it.
I think that might be because the side yard setbacks in most of the other districts say for residential buildings refer to R1A or B. Whereas the commercial buildings, some of them you have side yard setbacks of 20 feet, where residential, I think the largest side yard setback we have is 12.
Why is a rear 20 for commercial and 35 for?
Anyway, so are people interested in consolidating that potentially?
Yes.
Okay, you got it.
Perfect.
You have consensus on it. All right, what about CBD?
This one's, I mean, there's really, the only restriction here is height. Your lot coverage, note 2, equal to the first floor. And what's note 4? Talks about parking.
Yeah, that was confusing to me.
Yeah, I didn't follow that either.
Oh, that's just to let you know, because you have parking in a couple different sections of the ordinance, so. This is just, in the end, you're gonna end up with one section that deals with parking for everywhere. Have you talked about parking in general? Have you gotten that far?
No.
Okay. I'm guessing it's gonna go to a parking maximum requirement instead of a minimum potentially, depending on if you agree with that or not.
For commercial purposes or for all purposes?
You'll have to decide what you wanna do, but yeah, that note's just there because your current CBD district must have talked about parking in that district. And so just to say that it's gonna be moved to a different part of the ordinance.
Sorry to back up 1 second. The column C. Is that which existing zoning district is that meant to cover? Is that meant to cover manufacturing?
C is community, so that would be like city
what I
hall,
thought.
the school.
Got it, okay, understood. Got it. All right, thank you.
Does anybody have any concerns with combining the CBD and the B1 districts? So, you have the same map up right there.
I think what I might recommend, instead of simply just combining districts in that way, is that we could certainly reduce the number of commercial districts we have, but I think we should more look at it by where they are, because we have CBD and then we have B1 and B2 below the bluff in close proximity to each other. But then we also have, I think, B1 and potentially B2 above the bluff as well.
Mhm.
And I think the better idea might be, if we want to do some consolidating, say the stuff below the bluff will be one and the stuff above the bluff will be the second, something along that line. Does that seem logical?
Was your-
Why wouldn't we just make everything below the bluff, CBD?
Yeah.
You certainly could.
And have the B1 up on top.
And I guess that's what I was
Because the
getting
way
to.
Downtown can build out downtown to grow quite a bit more. That would, I think, from a development standpoint, allow a lot more things to happen.
And I talked to a resident who just wanted to clarify. If we were to change the CBD boundaries, that is independent of the DDA boundaries.
Yes, that's correct.
DDA is a different invention. Yeah, okay.
So right now, the entire CBD is within the DDA boundary district boundary, but you could expand the CBD outside of the DDA districts.
Without expanding.
Yeah, the
Exactly.
DDA could always try to expand to follow whatever we end up doing, right, pretty easily.
They could try.
Yeah.
I don't know, pretty easily. It's
Well,
not-
even if we expanded the CBD to include all B1 and B2, I think that's still all within the DDA.
Below
That's
the block,
below the
not the
block.
B2, B1 above.
No, yeah, no. And I think that was the idea. The only thing that we would need to do if we're looking at combining the CBD and B1 and B2 in any way is look at uses. The B1 and B2 allow for more uses than what the CBD does. And so we would probably want to look at that to see how we want to address that, or if we want to address it or just expand.
I think that makes sense, because you'd want different commercial potentially uses between your CBD area and up on top of the bluff.
All right, so it sounds like we're interested in combining business districts somehow, in some way.
Are you comfortable with that height still in the CBD district and your new B, well, it's like your old B1, but being the same, the 30 feet, everybody's comfortable with 30 feet there?
Okay, given the way, our newest building downtown, the size of that. I don't think we should have more of those that big, but it certainly dwarfs 1- and 2-story buildings. And so I would suggest maybe we think about increasing it to like maybe 2.5 stories or something like that, just so the scale isn't so extreme. Because that building isn't going anywhere for a long time. And if we're able to increase some of the sizes of some of the smaller buildings over time. Again, that will allow, development and growth in a very limited downtown square foot area. You can only go up. And, so I would support that, but I don't know what the rest of y'all think.
And should it be the same all throughout the whole thing, or should it be determined how close to the bluff and how it affects the views?
I don't think it affects the views, it's too high.
We did a specific downtown master plan. It was quite a while ago, 2012, I think maybe. And they talked about that in that. And they had the idea of increasing heights, but as you get away from the water, that the height would slowly increase. So that buildings closer to the water, the buildings behind would be able to
That's
see
right.
over.
Yeah, so you're not blocking
yeah.
the water, but you've got a little bit more height.
That
as
was
you
an
get
idea that was
away
in
from
that.
That
That's
would
an
be more-
outdated document now, but that was an idea that was presented in that.
Might be worth looking
Yeah.
at. I think we should look at that height.
Yeah.
I think what's happened across from the Lyric Theater with the giant elevator penthouses on top, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. That one got.
That never should, that should.
But the,
should
but
go through.
just from a design standpoint, you have an extra. Half story to work with, as far as creating loft spaces and things like that can become somewhat dynamic. And you don't have that opportunity at two stories and 30 feet. But that allow for mezzanines and a bunch of other things that happen that the building code allows, but you can't do it because there are limitations. And those things are allowed in the building code because it gives, the mezzanine levels aren't counted as far as the square footage of the building in the building code world. And that allows people to do more and get more and not having to meet stricter requirements as far as egress and a whole bunch of other stuff. So mezzanines are, in my world are pretty cool. And if we could have that extra, 2.5 stories or 3 stories, but with a tight limit on the height, that could add to a more dynamic CBD business districts.
Could something like that be done within that 30-foot height limit, or would that need to be
You
changed?
need more height. You need a little bit more height,
What would
but
that,
not a whole lot. I mean, you went to 36 feet and allowed 3 stories or 2 stories plus mezzanine or something like that. Is, in my opinion, not a bad thing, but I'm a goofball architect, so no.
And I think that's something we probably should talk about.
yeah.
So height is not.
That's a big issue.
Okay.
That's one we want to come back to and learn much more.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move over, if we can, to waterfront.
Planning commission first.
Yeah, let's hear what Sarah can tell us about that.
Yeah, so this one has the combination of the waterfront and then the waterfront one. So that's combining the residential into the waterfront. So I would love to hear the planning commission's thoughts on the residential. As proposed in this memo, it's talking about making single family dwelling residential a special use permit, if you would like to go that direction. Or if you prefer the existing RF1, which there's only, is there 5 lots there maybe? If maybe that makes sense to maybe call it like the R1A district or something. What's in the, what's on those lots right now?
yes. Not sure, I'd have to look.
Okay, I'm sorry.
They're right
Put
I
that on the
can
spot.
certainly get some information on that. I think that was created because there is a specific project there that has residential within it. Yeah, I would just, combining districts is, I don't think that's a problem, but I would really highly encourage you to think very long and hard before you allow through by right use or special land use residential within the waterfront district. Residential has been and will continue to be a higher value use of property along waterfront. And it will slowly pinch and you'll lose your commercial properties on the waterfront. just the dollar value of residential waterfront properties will, businesses will eventually say, we can sell for twice to three times as much and let somebody build a house here, You
Once
will,
that
of course, have,
happens- Once that happens, there'll be no public view or access to the waterfront. Might as well be in Colorado if we're gonna have a wall of condominiums.
and that's just something that I would caution on. If we value commercial on the waterfront, if we don't, but it's just food for thought.
Why don't we open it up to the public on this? Topic? Anybody care to comment on the waterfront?
Well, I was actually gonna ask if I could comment on the CBD, but you skipped that. I wasn't trying to.
Well, then, let's open it up to any topic.
Well, on the CBD, my only comment is Sarah brought up the parking word, so I'll hop on it. We basically exempt parking requirements in CBD, and if you enlarge the CBD and you enlarge the exemption, it just pushes that parking problem further out. So I fully disagree with exempting parking from downtown, but that's already been done. But if you make the CBD bigger, which I think is a good idea, you gotta deal with the parking.
Okay, so that's a watch out you're giving us.
I think so.
Okay,
When you exempted the CBD from parking, all you did is push that parking to the adjacent property owners. You didn't, that's all that happened. So.
great.
On the waterfront, I would thoroughly agree with Jeff. That if you allow any type of single family home on the waterfront, all the commercial property will disappear. Within whatever, 5-10 years. It's happened everywhere in the country, so that's unstoppable because of the value of land. And if you think about our piece of land, originally that was 5 lots. We bought them over time, and it's 1. But depending on what the land split rules are, it would split again. So, and as Bob said, when you put private property on the waterfront, there will be hedges and fences, and you won't have the view that it currently exists. So that's the difference between those two. That district has got residences on it,
So
which is fine.
waterfront one has residents.
Yes.
We combine them. Now you can have residents anywhere.
Well,
No, it's going to be.
as proposed from what we had on here, that waterfront and waterfront one were to be combined. And that residential use was proposed to be through some type of something available in all. And I just caution on that. I think a good example is, we have commercial businesses downtown, that sell for $1 amount, and similar property and residential use is 3 times, 4 times as much. And so it's just, and I think a good example is, the property out on Beach Drive. We're looking at $50,000 to $60,000 per front foot. When you look at those numbers for vacant land, and then you bring them, to more waterfront downtown, that creates a pretty high dollar figure for a commercial business to say, we could go somewhere else and sell this land and make, and I don't know, it's just something to be cautious of. I'm not trying to steer one way or the other, but keep it in mind.
Well, before we get into this any further, do we want to instruct Sarah hands off the waterfront district before she spends time planning and we say, oh, no?
I think it was along the same lines there. Can we just make sense to take the existing WF1? Which are those all single family homes right there?
Those are the
They
boat
look like
houses.
single family.
I think
homes.
those are the boat houses. They're from Little Harbor Club is just in this side of waterfront, and it's so that row of boat houses before the
Can't they
beach,
be in
right?
the R district?
Those are all residents.
Yeah, those are.
But they're, no, I mean, they're the ones that are sitting. Yeah.
Can't we just put those into the R1A district, even though it's not contiguous to it?
The caution with that is, what if the intention in the future, even though it's not shown in the future land use plan, do you want to take that over in the future for waterfront commercial activities or community activities, and eventually phase out residential for that part
Yeah.
if it became available?
What is the future land use on that?
It would be pretty low, but that's, its idea is it may happen one day.
Well, but we can always address that then. I'm just trying to, for simplification purposes.
The future land use map shows it.
I'd like to keep the waterfront really strong for what Michael was saying.
The future land use map shows it as residential, as exists right
Okay.
now.
Yeah, so if you made it R1A, it'd be consistent with your future land use map.
For simple then.
So
Another member of our public would like to come. Would you care to introduce yourself?
Jennifer Blancato, I live at 531 West Summit. I think that a huge portion of the charm of Harbor Springs is the waterfront section where public can use that and come down and see it, whether they approach via the water on a boat and utilize our marina, or they approach by car or bicycle or what have you. Being able to access all that waterfront area and see the water, it's a huge, in my opinion, a huge portion of the charm and the draw of Harbor Springs.
Without the water, it's just another town.
Yeah.
Why would we not want waterfront to go all the way through? Why do we want residential there? Even in the future land use? Why?
The things that are there would be grandfathered in if we change the
Right.
zoning. I mean, it's not like they're gonna go away.
I mean, to say that, oh, it's a long ways away. I mean, Saginaw never thought that those aggregates would go off of the river, and they did. Bay City never thought that the asphalt plants would go down, but they did. And they put it in the future land use, and now it's booming in those areas. I think I think we need to be a little looking in the future and,
I don't want to dilute the waterfront.
Are you thinking leave it as waterfront commercial?
yeah,
As well, yeah.
yeah.
And we could-
Non-conformity.
We could certainly add language that would keep them from being non-conformities, to say that they would be treated as conforming for future things, if we wanted to specify that, so that they weren't overly
Right.
punished for the change
Right.
we're proposing.
Right. But I don't think that they should just be sitting there. I think we should be looking into the future and,
So you're saying make it waterfront,
Yeah.
grandfather in the
Yes.
bits that are there. of
Yes.
course. And then if they decide.
and then when they go, it becomes waterfront and the city has it all right there.
Does that sound like it?
We don't technically have it somewhere.
Well, you,
Yeah.
it's waterfront. It's not gonna be residential.
I mean, I think that's a great plan, and I would caution you, just because it goes against your future land use map, that maybe you'd wanna come back and have that discussion and look at your future land use to add that back in. If you're zoning it, essentially you're zoning it commercial, which is more intense than residential, which your future land use has. Right now, it matches your future land use, so I'd wanna make sure you have a good case for doing that.
But we can change the future.
Right.
land,
I don't disagree with you, I do
We just need
agree, I'm
to
just
do
thinking
one more
you
step.
might need to come back to this first before you carry that over to your zoning ordinance. Just in case, because potentially, even if you make those homes conforming in the zoning ordinance, potentially they could have issue with it. You're changing the zoning to commercial, telling them, if they somehow cease to exist. I guess it depends on what the language looks like for those couple of homes in the zoning district. If they're conforming and the house burns down, then they get to rebuild their house. But they could convert it, if they converted it to commercial, maybe they couldn't go back to residential. I don't know, might have to figure out.
We have some other area in the city where I think we did something similar, that we changed the zoning code, but stated that the buildings that were there were deemed to be conforming, so that there wouldn't be non-conformity issues that would prevent them from doing things, but that if they modified or did something, that it would be from that point going forward. And we've also talked about adding that middle step where you would have some non-conforming uses that would still be able to make improvements, where the planning enabling act allows now.
So
Are they conforming now in the WF one? Are they
I
conforming?
believe so. I'd have
Was
to double check.
WF one created for them?
I think so.
Yeah, must have been created. Totally non-conforming. Bill, see what I'm saying? So.
Jennifer, would you like to say one more?
Well, I have a question with what you said, Vanessa, about if in the future somehow those that are residential on the waterfront currently, in the future, if it all becomes waterfront, who would make the decision? Would it be the city? Who makes the decision on what would be built there, what could be built there, what would happen with it? How does that come about?
I think the answer is different. You threw in multiple things there. What could somebody build? Zoning kind of, to some extent, dictates what somebody can do with their property. But the decision of what will somebody build, that's the property owner, right? If the zoning code provides you with, let's say, 3 options of you can do commercial and you can do residential, but not industrial, then you're left with those choices as the property owner of here's what I can do, or the specific uses. So I guess it's a little bit of both.
So if those homes now are residential and for some reason, let's just say the current owners decide we're not gonna own it anymore, but somehow it changes hands to the city's property?
No,
That was maybe a bad turn of phrase.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the situation, like right
It could be
now,
commercial, but it can't be residential. That's our way of trying to make sure that that waterfront does not go residential.
It can only be the commercial that's allowed within that zoning.
Correct.
Which would be something
Related
like,
to waterfront. generally.
Right.
something like an ice cream store or?
I don't think in a WF.
We'd have to look up. what
we'd have to look at the specific uses, I think, but right now, the difference between waterfront 1 and waterfront is, in waterfront 1, we allow commercial and residential. Specific uses of commercial. So if we were to change it so that it was just waterfront, we would basically be saying to the property owners there, you have a residential building, you can keep it as a residential building. You can sell it to the next person and they can continue to use it as a residential building. But at some point in time in the future, if you wanted to remove that residential building and convert it to commercial use, you wouldn't be able to go back
To residential.
to residential.
Okay,
So like the Pier Restaurant is in WF. I mean, so there's a restaurant there. I mean, there's different ones, but it just keeps the residential up.
gotcha, okay. And residential could be multifamily, like so someone potentially could put up a big condo building.
It depends on what we say is acceptable residential uses. Some areas we say, yes, you can have an apartment building. In other residential areas, we say, no, it has to be a single family home.
We actually say private, non-commercial buildings. This is waterfront district. As it's a permitted use, is private, non-commercial buildings in the waterfront. district.
Type of one.
Hmm?
No, in waterfront, in WF.
The depot, I imagine, would be.
So we have to take a look at what it's actually in the zoning code.
But Depot looks like it got changed into CBD.
That's Grand Marina. That
Oh,
was right around Grand Marina.
No, this is.
Well, that might be the little Harbor Club.
The little Harbor Club is down.
Yeah, Harbor Club would be
WF1.
private,
Yeah, it's
non-commercial.
But that's what it said, anyway, that's what it says for water.
Yeah, so such as day rooms and boathouses.
Yeah,
Yeah, the only real difference, the WF1, everything in there says the same as WF, except for a special use permit can be a single family dwelling. That's the only difference between the two.
Yeah.
So I have a note here, I don't. Either to move it into the R1A or if we can create language to make it so that they're not non-conforming, but. Not open to residential to the whole
We can
district.
figure out some
Yeah.
way to.
So I have a note here for that.
And you have another. Yeah, so another comment from the public.
I have a question. So under waterfront, we have combined maximum lot coverage says note 4. Is there a note 4? Or does that really mean note 5?
I think that should be note 5.
Well, there is a note 4 up at the top of
Yeah,
the.
it's above for parking.
Yeah, about parking.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, so you can sort that out. But then in note 5, this came up with us of how you measure the width of the building. So maybe you could look at that language and see if there's better language. Because
We've
not
talked,
clear.
yeah, we've certainly talked about defining that a little more clearly and also providing a diagram that would help show what the intent there is. So there's less question.
And are you getting into the words yet, or is that another meeting? I do refer to Article 7 a lot. I don't know what Article 7 is.
I don't think we're gonna be able to get into that yet tonight. This is our first look at concept. And I think you guys nailed it, Sarah. You illustrated what's possible and gave us some recommendations. I think we've identified like 7 or 8 different things that we want to learn more about that would have implications. Yeah, downstream. Really. And so I don't think we need like another draft back at this point.
Okay.
I think we need to learn more about a lot of wishy-washy.
Is that something, do you need something from us to learn more?
Yeah, we do.
Or-
Like John agreed to provide, kind of a tutorial on some of the key concepts that he went over for us in our training a couple Saturdays ago.
Mhm.
And he's trying to pump those out as quickly as he can. And so, yeah, if you could help him, that'd be great.
What would you like to see?
We're
next?
hungry to learn.
Well, what one would you like to see next?
I'd like to see 2 or 3, and I'd like to see minimum lot size. I'd like to see, minimum lot widths, I'd like to see minimum dwelling size, all about residential dwellings and.
Residential minimums? Okay.
With the duplexes, do you want to learn more
Yeah,
about,
I wanna
because
learn
I'm
duplex.
really interested in combining those, so I'd like to
Yeah.
get
So I said,
people
let's go
some
right, let's go
angst
right to
off of that.
residential. And let's go into the nuts and bolts about, how things could look if we wanted to. Allow smaller dwellings. Yeah.
So for the next meeting, do you want to, I'm hearing, it sounds like we want to maybe table the rest of the discussion for this stuff. These wording things to the next meeting and also discuss minimum residential requirements.
I'd say
minimum
let's
size.
hold on the words. Let's go to the big concepts and let's get the visuals and let's really try to absorb what the implications could be for allowing smaller and different kinds of houses. Member of the public.
I was just saying to Michael's point, if there's something that's referenced even in the existing document, and it doesn't exist, or it's not present, it would be good to add that.
What was
It
the
would be
one?
good to add that, if you're referencing something. It would be good to know what it
Sure.
is.
Sure. My thought on what we did tonight was just to see a first look and an illustration of how the combinations could be made. And I think we nailed it. Now we have a lot of work on words and
But we don't know what words you're working on if Article 7 isn't there.
I think this is probably referring to our existing Article 7.
No,
No?
I checked. Article 7 is. I don't know. It has nothing to do with this. So I'm not sure what is referred. So it would get you
Article
confused.
7
It would be good to find what it
is.
is.
all right.
It's opening,
Multi-family or multi-something.
it's opening right now. Have you talked about Article 7 yet as a supplemental regulations? So it'll be Article 7, it'll propose in the draft a supplemental regulation. So each of the uses, if there's additional information or requirements you're supposed to meet, so auto service stations subject to supplemental provisions in Article 7. So if it tells you have to be so far from a corner or the number of entrances, or lot sizes or things like that, specific to that use are all in Article 7. So you may have for duplexes, you may say a duplex has to say each dwelling has to be a certain size or something specific to that residentially, but you can see like under waterfront district, number C, municipal and private facilities for boat launching, servicing, sales, subject to provisions. So boat launching, I'm guessing in your current ordinance has some requirements for that use.
And we would put those in Article 7.
They all go in Article 7. So instead of having specific regulations, so in the waterfront one, if you were talking about, it's a single family dwellings, and then it has A through F of as long as it's has a you know, you can have a boathouse that's private, this and that. Those regulations are all getting moved into Article 7 instead of being in the zoning district.
Article 7 doesn't exist right now.
Right, it's a work in progress.
Because there's something else called Article 7 that's about the mobile home park.
Mhm.
So if that's
Yeah.
what, you know, they were, so it's a different thing. I didn't mean.
No, I understand now. I get the
Yeah.
concept. It just doesn't exist. so
It doesn't
it's
exist, yeah.
hard to comment.
Yeah.
Yeah, and John brought this up, I think, at the last couple meetings, how right in where we define our allowable uses, we also have requirements for them.
Mhm.
And he said that it would be best to separate them into two sections. So it looks like that's what we're
Right.
creating here is the start of that.
Yeah, because like I said, so like, yeah, in these single families, A says such building shall result from the alteration or replacement of the existing structure. Such building shall be adjacent to other structures of the same general type. Those type of regulations will get moved to Article 7 and all be in one spot. Makes it easier for each of the districts. You can either throw it in a table to say the approval process, and then you just say C section, and they're all in Article 7.
Great, I'll look forward to seeing that.
All right.
Right. Okay. Do we get enough of a taste for that and we identified what we want to learn about next? And in terms of next week's regular meeting, do we have?
2 weeks.
Thank you, next regular meeting, we have much regular business.
We have two things on the agenda so far. We have a special land use request and we have short-term rental discussion.
Okay, that sounds like a full meeting. All right, so let's, yeah, Sarah, if you and John can put your heads together and see what you can prepare for us for a month, month from tonight. And we'll keep it focused on zoning and learn about all about residential and some of the new concepts in the residential zone. Great. All right, so I'm going to close out that part of the agenda, and now I want to take you through quickly the draft of the presentation that we're going to make to City Council and talk about when that might occur. And you have the outline in your package, but these are the actual draft slides, and so let me take you through them. Kind of a dry run, and there's some key concepts I need your okay, next slide, please. The purpose of this presentation to council is to give them status on the zoning code review projects and make sure they're in sync with us. And this came from the discussions we've had, thinking we're looking at some pretty innovative things. Let's make sure council's with us on this. So that's what this is all about. Next slide. Pulled out some goals from the master plan that had to do with housing and underlined some key aspects. You guys read those probably in the prep package, so we can go on from that. Okay, next, please. So these are the influences and resources that we've been working with, zoning reform toolkit from the American Planning Association. Michigan Municipal League has this center one, which is very interesting, and AARP has a whole bunch of the same recommendations that are in the zoning reform toolkit, which is interesting. And you'll see why AARP plays heavily with our in our world, and then Beckett and Rader, of course. Okay. So here's what's going on statewide. Households are getting older. Households are getting smaller. We talked about that briefly. One-person households are on the rise. They're like a third of households in the state are one-person households now. And multi-generational households are increasing, just like the old days. And then the definition and the makeup of a household is fluid. You know, kids can be part of a household, older people can be part of a household, a friend can be part of a household these days. And so it's not just a husband, wife, and 2 kids anymore. And we learned baby boomers would like to age in place if they possibly can. Plus, there's probably not going to be capacity for people to move into long-term care places for all of baby boomers. And really interesting thing, some studies say that baby boomers, older people and younger people might want the same kinds of housing choices. So that's interesting. Okay. Next. So, all right, here's, we have those trends and we have them in spades. We have 55% of our people in the city of Harbor Springs are over 60 years old already. And, I said about a third of households in the state are single person. Well, we have 43% already. That is a huge percentage of our households are single people. And then our median household size is 2.15 people. So when we're talking about sewer, and we're talking about all those kinds of things, our household size is small. So we have a whole bunch of one person, and then we have our average is barely above 2. Anyway, so we have very small household sizes here. And then the blue column is just a comparison with the 49740 zip code. And so there overall, including us, the townships surrounding us are younger, a bit younger. They have less one-person households, and their household size is a bit larger with 2.27. So anyway, the main takeaways here are we are getting older and our households are getting small. Okay, next slide. So here's some anecdotes that I've heard, and I want to test these with you and see if you've heard the same. And they are, I don't need this big house now. I wish I could find a nice smaller one near stores. We're going to need help to stay in our home. A caregiver could live on the property, but we would each need some privacy. Now that I'm older, I don't want to live in the country. I'd like to move into town. Have you heard people say that? Nancy works in that world, so maybe she has. Somebody would say my parents want to stay in their home rather than go to an assisted living place, but they would need a one-story opportunity, for safety and all that. And young people say, we're young and we don't even want a big house to take care of. We want to travel, we want to do other things. And someone would say, I would love to have a small house in town for 6 months and then just travel the rest of the time. And some people could say, I'm not ready to own a home yet. I wish I could just rent a nice place. So those are things I've heard and things that are going on around the state. And the implications of that. So this is a key slide I want to make sure we're in sync on before presenting to council. And that is we have a partial mismatch between the kinds of homes that we allow today and the kinds of homes that residents are likely going to want in the very near future. And, the hypothesis is that smaller, simpler homes for one-story living are going to be desirable. Low maintenance or no maintenance house and yard situations are going to be desirable. Adaptability for changing household structure and size. So kids need to move in for a year, or if a parent or a brother or something needs to be there, housing approach needs to adapt for that. And we need homes that can be rented by year-round community members. So are we in sync with these implications?
I would suggest that perhaps the term dwelling be used instead of just referencing homes. Homes have a connotation of single family home, but especially your last thing, there's all sorts of dwellings that could be rented that aren't homes. Just a minor point.
Thank you. That's great.
We do also cap the homes that could be rented by year-round community members. So I don't know how much of that we can really exploit.
They're not capped if they're rented year-round. Just the short-term rentals are capped.
Yeah, do short-term.
So long-term aren't, there's no cap.
Okay.
I think also mentioning, again, multiple residential, not just this, all sounds pretty strong, just single-family home. That maybe we also need to look at, some.
Okay, well, I'll show you what we have in the presentation. You tell me if that covers it. We're generally in sync on these implications then? Okay, go on, Victor. Oh, you did? Okay, so here are the zoning code changes, structural changes that we've been considering. We talked about these tonight already. Simplify, streamline, modernize, replace words with tables and illustrations, remove requirements which are addressed elsewhere, sync with county and nearby townships when that makes sense, and to eliminate bureaucratic processes. We touched on almost all of those tonight. Are there any others that you can think of, or? Okay, let's go on. Here are the zoning approaches that we're considering. We talked about a whole bunch of these tonight already. Collapsing zoning districts, reducing minimum lot widths and sizes, minimum dwelling sizes. Parking, we didn't quite get to tonight, but that's a recommendation that a lot of these folks are giving us. Character districts, form-based zoning was mentioned in the master plan. That's something we need to learn about and see if that can play for us. Expand allowable uses, so that could involve some low-impact businesses in residential areas, along with home occupations. And then Rick and George got me thinking about exploring methods and materials that would benefit the environment. So we talked about maybe changing some of our paving requirements, and we talked about recycling. So those are some areas that we can explore. Okay, next. And so the kinds of housing types or dwelling types, maybe we start to call them. There would be smaller lots and smaller homes. And here are just a couple of illustrations of what those could look like. And Jeff will jump in.
Seamlessly.
Here's another couple illustrations. We talked about it talks about current lot size minimums and all that. All right. Accessory dwelling units. There are a few examples of those, and it calls out that we don't allow long-term rentals today. And so just some illustrations so people know what we're talking about. Okay. Cottage courts. This is one that played really well when we had a big public input session a couple of years ago in terms of type of dwelling, and those are often 500 to 900 square feet, organized around the courtyard, pretty efficient use of land, and could be a low maintenance, no maintenance kind of a dwelling setup. Next. More cottage courts can provide a sense of community too for all those single person households. Might be nice to be part of a community. It's an efficient use. Okay. Here's tiny homes that was mentioned in the master plan that we should explore those. Are they right? Are they wrong? I don't know. Are we ready? I don't know. But we'll explore them. Here are a couple duplex examples. And the main point is that they can look like a nice single family home. They're done well and they are an efficient approach. And it is a way, for a homeowner to live in their own modest place and perhaps get some income, and maybe it would be a long-term rental for someone in the community. Some more nice duplexes. Okay. Here's a fourplex, just in case we want to take it that far. I don't know. We might, and they can also look like a large family home. Some more fourplexes. And so here's a key slide that I need your input on. And the question is, what about affordable housing? And I've said that it really isn't feasible to include affordable housing in a zoning code. That's not the place for it. It may be a worthwhile community goal. City council could decide to try to incent that. We may decide to try to incent it, but I don't think the zoning code is the place to do it. And I don't even know how we would do it, because it's such an imprecise term. And it's a moving target. Everybody has their own ideas. And the city doesn't determine what's affordable, right? Property owners do. And the market does. And I've said the city doesn't dictate rent or the selling price of property. Individuals do. And Jeff gave me a caution.
We do.
Very narrow.
Yeah, and not to,
Very narrow case.
not to interrupt you, but
Yeah.
like I mentioned, so we entered into an agreement with Hillside Apartments, where we provided through a payment in lieu of taxes program that they pay a reduced tax of actually zero taxes. But there's a caveat that they have to maintain a certain percentage of their units at an income-based rate. So that's one instance where we do determine.
Do we actually set what that rate is though, or it's a formula?
They have a process, but it's somehow based on income.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so
So another, but they mentioned earlier that, through some type of state program, that perhaps an overlay district may also be an option. Now, I don't disagree with what you're saying, but there may be ways that can be done.
I don't know, so it's zoning. I just don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
It sounded when
Well, an overlay district is in zoning, correct, Sarah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
when I blasted through those bills, it looked like it was more about financial incentives and tax approaches and that kind of thing. I really didn't see anything about zoning, but
Where it would tie in with zoning would be the creation of those overlay districts so that you can define where in the city you'd like to see those activities happen.
Well, and we don't get to dictate what is affordable housing, but what we do with our zoning code has a big effect on it.
right.
So,
So that
I
actually,
mean,
that's
there is a tie to that.
the big point I came to in that.
Okay,
Instead of that, we've been focusing on just expanding the choices of types of dwellings that residents can build here. And then what happens to them after that? It's up to individuals and market. All the macroeconomic forces that we can't control. So if we can allow some different types of dwellings, if it makes sense for the community, then at least we're providing the possibility for more housing and some different kinds of financing. Right? You guys in sync with that? I'll rework the first bullet then.
Yeah, I think, just for clarity of communication to city council, for that first line to just say, perhaps, maybe only by way of overlay districts in the zoning code. Or something like that.
Yeah, even something about you can't write affordable housing into the code, like that's not a use.
Right.
You have to, there's different avenues.
But, this point, is probably the main point of the whole presentation. That's what we've been focused on. And I just want to make sure we're all in sync with that principle. Yes.
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 Yeah.
All right, beautiful. And the summary says the city does not and should not decide what people build on their property. But we could allow more housing choices, maybe easier approvals. And so what could happen from all this? In fact, we don't really know. We could do all this work, allow all these different choices, and nothing may change. People may still elect to build big detached single-family homes. But at least they would have some other choices, and maybe somebody would build some smaller, low-maintenance homes. Maybe somebody would, build some ADUs, maybe some duplexes, and maybe even a cottage court. But planning commission's focused on making those possible if it makes sense for the community. Okay. And next steps, we'll explore the ideas, bring back some well-researched recommendations, and I've staked out we're probably gonna need the rest of the year to bring back some results. Does that seem right to you all?
Yeah.
We got a lot to learn.
we're already in March too, so.
Yeah.
I think that ties into John Eichelangeli's forecast for how long it would take to
Here's capacity to
get through this process.
There's all right. So overall, we in sync?
Yeah.
They tell their story fairly and accurately.
Pretty dang close.
Pardon me?
Pretty dang close. Well done.
Thank you very much for that. Input. Really appreciate it. And yeah, it sounded like we could do this. City Council March.
There's a March 6th meeting, I believe, and a March 20th meeting, and I think it will kind of come down to getting whatever we need to Victor and so that he can include that in the packet for them, so.
And March 6th is Monday.
Yeah.
March 6th is Monday, so. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
we're,
by tomorrow.
yeah.
We can Get that done. We're the planning commission.
Yeah, I think it would just be making whatever final edits you need.
I don't know what else is on the agenda. I'll check the Victor and we'll see if that makes sense. All right, thank you very much. That was really helpful. Okay, coming to the end of the meeting. Are there any other new or old business members would like to bring up? All right. Thanks very much. Then this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll be at the